Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for your presence at this presentation. What should I do? Taking the good decision, individually as in a group, and it's going to be presented by Laurence Loubières in this context of the spirituality. This is the second presentation for today, but before beginning with the presentation, I'd like to hand the microphone over to Jose Sanchez from the Jesuits of Canada, who is going to give us some technical information.
So, for those who want to listen to this session in French, in order to choose a language, in English, in order to choose a language of your preference, if you're on a computer, in the controls of the session on the screen where you're looking at the session right now, click on the button Interpretation, and then click on the language that you wish to hear. If you're on a mobile device, in your meeting controls, press the button with the three little dots or plus, and then press Language Interpretation. And finally, choose a language that you want to hear, that you wish to hear. And please remember that language interpretation is not available if you're accessing the session through the Zoom app separately on a mobile browser. So I will also post these instructions in the chat box. À part de ça, si vous avez des problèmes techniques, vous pouvez utiliser les boutons soutien technique dans les menus.
So if anyone has any technical problems, you can use the technical support button or send an email saying you are having problems. All of these sessions are going to be shared with you in about 5 days after we end this session. And finally, remember that you can always ask questions with the question and answer app. And we're going to try to answer all of the questions at the end of the session. Thank you very much. And so before we begin with the pre-taping that was prepared by Sister Laurence before the direct question and answer situation, I'd like to introduce Laurence Loubières, who lives in Toronto. She is a sister of the member of the Congregation of the Xaverians. She works with the Jesuits in Canada. She is very highly involved in administration and Ignatian spirituality. She helps religious congregations in many of their decision-making questions and in strategic planning. She's been working for 15 years for sustainable development, responsible development, and she also wrote a book called 20 Questions written by Father Renaud, a Jesuit. So we'd like to wish you a good presentation, and we'll see everybody towards the end after Laurence has finished. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurence Loubières, and I am a Xaverian sister. And today I'm going to be making a presentation on what should I do is the topic, and how to take good decisions individually and in groups. I want to particularly thank all of the organizers of this conference and all of you who are participating, who have taken the time to participate and who are celebrating these Ignatian celebrations. And so I am going to be the person who is presenting for this session. How can we take good decisions individually and as groups? But I'm going to begin, first of all, by introducing myself. Like I said, I am a Xaverian sister. I work with the Jesuits at the Center for Discernment that was established in March 2019, a service of the Jesuit Province of Canada. And the mission is to help the religious congregation and various ministries, beginning with the Jesuit ministries, to undertake communal discernment and how to take decisions together. And so this service, we serve, we give talks and group work and help different groups to move through important discernments. What should I do? How can I take a decision? If we look at from a decision perspective, we see that our life is a succession of decisions and choices. All day we make choices. We make daily choices that begin from the very morning when we get up, but we also have other choices that are more engaging or engage life choices. And the question has been asked over and over again by all of the thinkers, and that how do we take a good decision? How will I know if my decision is a good decision or it's going to help me in my own personal life? And finally, taking good decisions is to reflect on how to live well. And this way of thinking, in the way that we take decisions and that we reflect on the issue, is a school of life and a school that lasts a lifetime. So you're never really finished working or on trying to improve our decision-making process that will help us to go forward in our lives. Ignatian spirituality gives us or provides us with some answers or at least elements to help us arrive at these. And in order for us to enter into this Ignatian spirituality to help us, we're going to begin with the life of St. Ignatius himself, who was the first general superior of the Jesuits and whose life helps us to know how we can take good decisions. So in this presentations, we're going to have different stages. So we're going to begin by looking at the itinerary lived by Ignatius of Loyola. He's going to help us to see how he took decisions. And then we are going to move to the foundations of Ignatian spirituality that we can draw from his experience. Then we're going to look at some of the tools we have for personal discernment, what we call decision-making, which is often a question of discernment, and we'll see what that's about. Then we're going to have tools for our discernment together in community, communal discernment. And finally, we're going to leave you time to be able to ask questions and make comments. Let's begin, therefore, with the life of Ignatius. Ignatius lived in the 16th century, 15th, 16th, in Europe. And in his youth, he was a knight, and he liked to really be out there fighting and chivalry, and he had great ambitions to become very influential in the court of the king of the time. And he was in Pamplona in Spain at a battle in 1502 when he was hit by a cannon. It was his leg was hit, and therefore he was immobilized, which stopped him from being able to continue his wonderful career that he was hoping to be able to live in the area of chivalry or become a knight. And so he started asking himself, what am I going to do with my life now that all of this, my dreams are now have been thwarted because of this problem I'm having with my leg. And so in his autobiography, he tells us how he was forced to stay in bed for several months. And during the months, he kept thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to make of my life after having been almost cut down by this situation? So we started thinking of different things, and they all left a different impression upon him. When he placed himself and started thinking anew about his life, about being a knight, about the wonderful, tremendous exploits that would attract all of the attention and maybe a very rich and powerful woman that he would be able to seduce because of this. So that gave him a lot of energy. But afterwards, this notion would leave him, almost like dissolve, in order to leave him in a time of drought, inner drought and disgust almost. So when he began to reflect, and he found books on the lives of the saints, on the life of Christ, and when he would read them and start thinking about these things, he started thinking about following Christ, and finally to take the path like Dominic did or Francis did, placing themselves in a situation where they would be at the service of God, at the service of Christ. He had a great deal of energy, and this energy was long-lasting. It never left him, and it left him with a sense of profound peace and joy. And so this special grace, which is absolutely basic and fundamental for this time in his life, made him realize the differences between the emotions that were good emotions and that were life-giving, and the others that were good but provided us with energy, that provided us profound joy and perseverance. And so this spiritual movement in him of emotions and feelings were very different when he started looking at them and went in depth to think about them. So little by little, Ignatius understood that there was greater joy and energy for him when he thought about a life that would be totally different, that he would be at the total service of Christ and follower of Christ. And so this experience of profound conversion sent him out and to do what was deepest and necessary for him. And all of a sudden, he turned from the projects that he had for knighthood and for all of the wonderful, tremendous exploits he was going to do. So anyway, he was healed and he was able to get up, and he set out. He left the family home, like the chateau, where he was convalescing, and he set out to follow Christ without really knowing where this was going to lead him. So that was the first major decision. Going back to what was happening in his soul, what was moving him, what was the source of greatest peace and joy for him. Ignatius left Loyola in 1602 after his convalescence, and he set out, as I was saying, step by step, stopping in Manresa in Spain, where he lived some very strong, profound spiritual experiences. Then he continued his path by asking himself how he could place himself at the service of Christ and follow Christ like Dominic did and like St. Francis had done. And that led him to the Holy Land, to Jerusalem, so that he could be closer to where Christ lived. And little by little, he began to travel, and he went to Jerusalem, where he thought he would stay. But the circumstances were such that he had to leave Jerusalem. He couldn't stay there because there was a lot of conflict, and there were many things happening there. And the Franciscans in Holy Land asked him, go home, because it's too dangerous here. And they didn't want to have to manage that kind of situation. So anyway, he left and he went back to Europe. And in 1524, he returned to Europe after his trip to Jerusalem. And that's where he started asking himself, what am I going to do? What do I have to do? And so during the course of that reflection period, there was a desire that stayed with him, that continued to grow in him. And it was this desire to want to help the souls. And that was the spiritual movement that he had lived, and everything that he had received because of what he had gone through made him want to help others to enter into the same experience of God and to invite them to move forward on their own path. And so it's 1624, and he said, okay, I want to start by studying how I can help to save souls and how I can bring others to living the same experience of God that I had and help them to go towards God. So he began to study like a little child with professors and teachers And then what we see after in the life of Ignatius is his entire life from that moment on always focused was focused on the call and the desire to help others, their souls. And there were many episodes and many circumstances in the life of Ignatius where this fundamental desire of wanting to help others and help the souls was always present. And all of the events that he went through, all of the circumstances became opportunities for him to really kind of live this, a call. And so he went to school in Spain with little children, and then he left to go back and to learn the basics of grammar and other things. And that led him to the university, where he came to Paris to study at the university in philosophy and theology, because the University of Paris was very well known and would be able to help him to help the souls, which was his desire. And we see him then leaving for England, going to look for alms and money in order for him to be able to carry out the project that he had in his heart. And then from one thing led to another, and he created with his companions. Many of them were recruited when he was in Paris. And he founded with them in 1540 the Society of Jesus, the Society of Jesus as we know it, the Jesuits, where their goal was, and it is written into the fundamental code, we say the object of this company is to help the souls of its members and of their neighbors to attain the final end for which they were created. So you can see how this call was this basic call was was accepted by Ignatius at a certain moment in his life, and it became little by little kind of like the motivating force that led him to choose what he did in each one of the circumstances in his life, in wanting and in his desire to want to help souls. And we had the creation of this Company of Jesus to help. We did this to bring greater scope to this call and to be able to help others to come and engage also in their desire to want to help others or souls. Anyway, the specific gift of Ignatius is that he realized that based on his own experience and his own spiritual experience, that he could become an instrument of God's grace by participating in the mission of Christ, by giving himself to the Spirit. So he realized that his own life, his own way of living, and his own life experiences could help God to work in the world, could help Christ continue to live his mission through Ignatius and through the events. But how would this happen? He did this by embodying ever more fully the grace that God had placed in him for the good of all. So he realized that this basic fundamental idea of wanting to help others was become, like I say, his motivating force. And he realized that it was the specific grace that he had received. And for him, it was necessary that he would be able to live this to the maximum in order for it to produce fruit in function of what God had given him in the way of talents and gifts. And therefore, his desire to help souls was to provide people with a vision and with tools from his own personal experience in order to allow others to enter into the same movement, and that they themselves would discover their own fundamental call and acquire a decision-making process that would help them to take the right decisions, and all of that based on their own personal experiences. And so we do this as Ignatian found it in his own life, this basic fundamental way of living it, and in the little things as well as in the major choices, in the little and the big decisions. The fruit of all of this wisdom of Ignatius that was accumulated over the life experiences, he was able to distill all of the fruit through his life process. Therefore, we had the spiritual exercises, and we have that booklet in order to bring a retreatant during a 30-day retreat to receive and to choose what we call the fundamental call. So that's the goal, eh? It is to allow people, all of those who accept to enter into this process, to recognize their choice, their profound choice, this basic fundamental call to which we are called by God, and the desire of God for us and our desire for God, which is the most basic in both aspects. And this call makes it possible for us to give direction and to allow us to walk with our whole life in the direction that God wants of us. And so we are filled during the course of our life, and we are able to choose because of the different elements of our life, so that little by little we can truly become who we are called to become, based and founded on that call. And then we have the position of having to choose all of the time, of desiring and choosing and remaining faithful to this call, and also to choose to do away with those things that keep us from walking on this path. So with this fundamental desire, automatically would lead us to making choices whereby we are able to think and therefore able to kind of discard those things that would not help us to realize this. But how did it happen for Ignatius in his life? And what are some of the basic foundations that came from his life? So we're going to look now at some of the elements of the foundations of the Ignatian spirituality that are formulated in a little bit different. It's the same elements, but it's a content that we're going to have to be able to, he's going to be able to use personally afterwards. So within a perspective of Ignatian spirituality, with the vision of the Ignatian spirituality that comes from the experience of Ignatius of Loyola, because of our Christian life, is to realize that, and as Ignatius wrote in his book on the spiritual exercises, is that human beings are created to praise, revere, and serve the Lord, and thereby their souls, so save their souls. So Ignatius wanted, he said, human beings are created to live for God. And so our life comes from God. We receive it from God. Our life is a gift of God. We are a gift of God. And we find our fulfillment in God. That is to say, our fulfillment when we give ourselves over to God, when we give everything that we have received and that we place it at the surface of the praise and glory of God. So our life takes meaning, and it has a raison d'être in the sense of the call. And each one of us has a specific place within creation, in the same way that a tree will produce such and such a fruit, such and such a bird will sing in such and such a way, such an animal will live in different ways. So each one of us receives a specific grace, our own spiritual identity that is profound, that allows us to take our place within this world and to live the specific grace that is called the fundamental grace. And this call is given to us for the good of all, because all of us are interconnected, interrelated. And so what each one is able to contribute is for the good of the whole, for all of creation. In the same way, like I said, that a tree would produce such and such a fruit, but it's at the service of the rest of creation. So we are called to live this fundamental call and to live them out based on the graces that were given to us by God. And so this way of seeing things resonates with what Paul writes in his letter to the Corinthians. In his first letter to the Corinthians in 12, he says, "Now there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit, and there are varieties of service, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it's the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good." And Paul continues by saying, "To one, the Spirit gives the word of wisdom, to the other, a word of knowledge, according to the same Spirit. Another receives in the same Spirit the gift of faith, another of healing, another of creating miracles, another to profess, another to discern, and so to speak different mysterious languages, and others to interpret. But the one that acts in all of this is always the same Spirit who distributes all of these goods, all of these gifts as he wishes and to whom he wishes. A second basic element in the spirituality of Saint Ignatius, and that is very much in keeping with the first, is this idea of what God does and wants in all things. God is at work. All creatures come from God. God is present also in all of his creatures, present in us, and God works in us. Ignatius, in one of his spiritual exercises over the 30-day experience, at the end, truly did contemplate God as the God as one who is at work in all creatures, in all people, in all circumstances, in all events. He never stops drawing us to him by working in our lives, by attracting us to him. It is the work of the Spirit through the role of God, through the sacraments, through prayer, through sharing in the life of Christ in our own spiritual life. It is this work of the Spirit that is called to attract us to God in all circumstances at all time. And therefore, if we want to live our true call, therefore, we must to alienate all of our decisions, all our desires, and to place all of this under the promptings of the Spirit, the direction of the Spirit. And that's why we have to be very attentive in the way that the Spirit works, so that we can align our energies and decisions on this direction that is indicated by the Spirit of God to want to serve God. And so in this same way, we become collaborators of God. That is to say, we work with God, we are aligned with his desires and with his actions in the world, and by so doing, we become who we are truly called to be and produce fruits that we are called to produce. And so, if we continue along that same line of thought, and we want to be in harmony with God's call and produce the fruit that God wants of us because of the graces that he has granted us, then at that time, you will realize that to decide becomes a search for coherence. That is, to know who I am, basically who I am, child of God, created for God, and what I do, what I should do, what is the deep and profound orientation of my life, so that I can give myself to God and to others by living this call, and therefore align who I am, what I do, and to do this to the best of my ability. If I truly want to live this call, it is important that I will live and that I will seek out this coherence through everything that I do in my life, through all things. And Christ is the one who lives this coherence perfectly. He is the one where his being and the word are totally adjusted to the desires of God. God made flesh or enfleshed in a human being. And his life speaks because he's totally is able to express this great mercy of the Father, merciful love of the Father. And that we do that in words and in action when he came to reveal who he was. And that is why during the course of the exercises, Ignatius invites us to pray and to contemplate Christ in his life in order to come to know him, truly know him, this interior life, he who knows God perfectly well, so that in turn we can live this by imitating Christ. And so our Father is the Father of all, and we are called to imitate Christ by perfectly living as much as we can this coherence based on our fundamental call.
Ce travail de suite de l'esprit n'est pas si simple parce qu'il y a des forces
Ignatius understood that it's not that simple because there are opposite strengths that try to turn us off from that goal. And there's also the Spirit of God that brings us closer to God. and brings us closer to our true identity and this true life in Jesus. But in the world, there's also the spirit of evil present, and it always tries to turn us away from God. That spirit of evil is trying to fight against God and tries to bring us far from God and be in opposition with that project of consistency, of coherence. So the spirit of evil is trying to turn us away from God constantly by locking us up in a way of living that is closer to lie. So the spirit of evil is trying constantly to contradict this project of God for us. And it brings us to be faced with obstacles, with contradictions. So in our spiritual life and in our life in general, we have to be able to recognize and to distinguish which is the spirit that is acting in us. Is it the spirit of God bringing us closer to God, or the spirit of evil that is trying to turn us away from God? Once we recognize those spirits, we have to accept the spirit of God that takes me to the right way or route, and turn away the spirit of evil. So we're always faced with choices. In each moment, we are asked to accept a spirit or turn off another spirit. So as we are experiencing this alternance in choices and challenges, the whole purpose is really growing or not the truth of our life through the truth of our life by making a whole set of choices that will make grow truth in our life. So our life becomes more online with that, and it will be testifying God more and more if we grow in that direction. And Ignatius, to guide us in that struggle, wrote a certain number of rules for the discernment of spirits. Among those rules is inviting us to recognize a state of consolation where we feel we experience a lot of dynamism, gratitude that comes spontaneously when we are at awe, looking at what we are given, what we are offered, and we're able to thank God for everything that is giving to us when we're filled with that gratitude state. And that state of consolation is also, translates also into increase of hope, of faith in God, of love for our neighbor. When we feel that dynamism, we also experience hope. There's something really good about it, something good that happens in us. But that consolation can also exist through moments of suffering, because when we're suffering because of sin or evil, when we're really wounded by what happens in the world, by the evil around us, it is also a form of consolation, because evil is something that we can move away from, but also experiencing suffering, it doesn't mean that we cannot experience consolation. It just means that we are in a place where we're able to feel gratitude and love for our neighbor, nevertheless. So it's a sign of consistency, of coherence with the invitation of the Spirit, and a sign that we're on the right track in our life route. So consolation is a good sign to guide us because it's guiding us into the right way, and it confirms us that we are heading in the right direction. It's a sign of the presence of a good spirit in our life. On the other end, desolation is producing opposite effects like decreased dynamism, discouragement, doubts, inner darkness, we see how this also translates into a withdrawal into oneself. We're not closer to God anymore. We begin being angry at others. We feel somehow some aggressivity as well. We feel that we're completely separate from God. And we understand that we're not in that position of alignment with God anymore. And in those moments of desolation, well, those moments can be caused by sin. Sometimes when we move away from God, we may experience this kind of desolation, feeling of guilt. And maybe it's a right time to test our resolutions. God can also allow a form of temptation, of trial or challenge to help us become more perseverant, more convinced to go ahead, to pursue in our route. And God allows that so that we understand that consolation, the fruit that puts us into a good disposition, well, it's not us that we created. It's a gift from God. So God reminds us that we depend on Him, and we cannot force or induce consolation. It's really coming from Him. So we better understand that state of dependency on Him. Now that we've looked at those different elements, we may look more concretely into our personal life. How can we implement, how can we live those different aspects? So, if we look back, after all, making decisions and making the right decision means choosing according to a deep desire, a deep call that we have heard or that we feel, whether because we did spiritual exercises or took part in a retreat, or because we pay attention to what really motivates us. So the decision takes on another dimension. So I stop being focused on the issue or the challenge that I'm trying to take up or to resolve. The decision then takes another dimension when it is part of a path of actualization. So we take distance from that issue that we're trying to handle, and we ask ourselves through that challenge, what is the choice I will make that will be helping me in growing and in better answering to that call, to turn away from what prevents me from making the decision. So it asks for a whole work of sorting out, a whole work of identification, distinction, and that's what we call discernment. So through all the elements that will help me to make a right decision. So this work is fundamental. The work of discernment then is fundamental at that point. A few tools now for discernment. We'll look at different types of discernment or tools for discernment. First, prayer, then spiritual direction, then the reviewing of events. And I'll share with you a scale of value that might be very useful to understand. And then we look at a small tool useful when you have to choose between two options, how to proceed when you find yourself in such a situation. First of all, prayer. Prayer, because it's the Spirit that teaches us all things. And we have to let the Spirit shed light on us. So the Spirit, well, the prayer is a way to put ourselves in disposition that helps us hear the message of God. And we can also add that there's no discernment possible without prayer. If we jump into making a decision without praying first, without listening to the Spirit before, the chances are very little that we may find the right direction. Ignatius insists much on preparatory prayer that he asks the retreatants to repeat during the 30 days of spiritual exercises. He asks the retreatant to pray the same prayer every time. And this is the prayer: may all my intentions, actions, operations be purely directed to the praise and service of God. And so we find again that notion of alignment. In everything that I do, I choose to do and I act so that everything is aligned with the praise and service of God. So it's a prayer that we can go back to any time during the day when we begin our day, our work, our prayers. We pray so that this alignment happens in everything that we are living. And he also teaches us how to contemplate Christ in the Gospels. So this is also how we can align ourselves with our desire, a deep desire of living as Christ. And Ignatius is also inviting us to the examen prayer. So taking the time at the end of the day to review everything that happened and see whether I lived or not that fundamental desire of mine. And let the Spirit show me what I should be more grateful for during the day, the moments where I really experienced that alignment, but also reviewing the moments when I was not able to experience that because I was in a situation of sin, maybe, or because the circumstances were somehow not open to that. And also recognizing those moments when it is more challenging to be grateful. And then the prayer of offering, as Ignatius says, he is inviting us to offer what we're doing. So all those prayers can be found in the booklet of exercises. And another way is to leave a retreat, for example. It could be a retreat of 1 day, 2 days, a weekend, or 30 days. There are many different types of retreats, many different proposals to live a special time that will help us in making important decisions in our life. So it can be a very good option to really root our choice, our future choice in the prayer, and to live that experience of alignment of our being and the direction that the Spirit is calling us to take. Another very useful tool is a spiritual accompaniment. And it consists in meeting regularly with a person trained in spiritual direction. So it takes persons who are properly formed and who are able to really identify what's going on. But with a person properly trained and formed, this presence may help us to guide us, but also to echo what we are saying. And we can be able to journey with that, with a person accompanying us. And this approach, as we are in front of a person and that person is listening to us, we are compelled to put into words what we are experiencing. So by putting what we're feeling into words, we get better tools to understand what's going on and to then identify the orientation of the Spirit and to move away from the guidance of the evil spirit. So this person, this vis-a-vis, or that person that is echoing what we are saying, well, this presence is helping us to be encouraged on one hand, but also to grow in freedom and to be more free to take the right decisions. Another a very useful tool and very important tool is what we call the reviewing of events, the capacity to go back to an event or a period of time in the past and take some distance and ask ourselves what happened at that point, what did I feel at that moment, to identify the work of the Spirit in us. Was it a moment where I experienced a consolation, so a time that I was really in a state of gratitude, of joy, peace, and dynamism? Or was it a time, a moment where I felt discouraged or really sad because I was experiencing something really contrary opposite of what I wanted to live? So it helps us identify the work of the Spirit in us. And from that event, from that moment, I can choose or re-choose an orientation and decide maybe to modify some parameters in my life. So it gives me some clues to navigate in my life. So it's an opportunity that is very important to exercise our freedom and put ourselves in a situation where we can choose by doing more things that are helpful to us and moving away from those things that are not really helpful to us to grow. And I'll share with you another tool that I'm using and that I appreciate much, something that you can certainly use. It's a very simple tool to review events, and it allows you to look back to events that happened. So you retrieve from your memories something that happened or an event. And it could be an event that makes you really happy and grateful and fulfilling, an event that puts me in this kind of disposition, or it can even be an event or something that was challenging and that led me to despair or suffering. So when we fill out this table, we can begin by describing what happened objectively, what happened during that event concretely. Then looking at the feeling, while exploring the feelings that came in me, that emerged in me because of that event or during that event. And then I can try to understand, why do I feel that? Why did I feel that I was energized, or why did I feel that I was saddened? And once I try to reflect on the cause, the reasons why I felt that way, I can ask myself, is my explanation valid? Because sometimes we may interpret an event, but be completely off track. So that step is also important because it helps me validating whether my explanation is valid or not. And the last column is very important because it brings us back to that place of freedom. What do I decide to do with that? So that event is inviting me to do or choose something. It may confirm things that I used to do already before, so I keep on doing that, or it may ask me to modify something or look for some help to change things. And the purpose of that tool is that we realize that even in difficult situations where we do not feel any gratefulness, we can do something. So the events, whether they're happy events or challenging events, whether they put us into consolation or desolation, well, they do not end there. They can be used as tools to go forward and to go deeper in that incarnation of the desire that we feel deep within. So to keep on walking, to keep on going. So this is the same version of the tool in English for those persons who will receive the document afterwards. You may use it in both languages. Then another tool that I find very useful to identify the issues in our life and to understand also at which level are the issues in my life. It helps me to understand where are the moments when I live that alignment, and where are the moments or the events that translate into contradictions, so where there's no alignment in my life. So from those elements, sometimes I may decide to pursue doing things or to make some changes for things that are more challenging, maybe. So this is the scale of values with different levels. An elementary level begins with the basic level. So everything that has to do with the basic functions, without which I cannot function. Then there's the whole social level. So all the interactions that I have with work, studies, relations with friends, with family, with the other sisters of my community. Then there's the cultural level. And that relates also to the social level. So from the cultural values, from the things that are dear to me, I will be maybe working in such a way, in a certain way. I will choose what I eat in a certain way. I will work and live in a certain way. So those are the things that usually I'm not too aware of because I do them automatically, spontaneously. But there's a whole cultural dimension that comes with it. And we see when we travel abroad, for example, we notice that the people are living in completely different ways in terms of relationships, relation to work or to education, because underneath there are different cultural values. And that's why they focus on other ways of living. And then there's another level that is the personal level, about choices and decisions. And eventually, the last one is the religious level, the level of graces received in prayer. And what we realize is that Christ came to show us that our center of gravity in our life is really between the personal and the religious level. We are children of God, deeply children of God. We're rooted into that. It's our identity, all baptized and all children of God. So we are invited to be rooted in that, to live our deep call. And from that place, try to understand that, to see that alignment between the different levels. So in my choices, in my decisions, the way I will be free in my life, I want to be faithful to that call, to that deep call, that identity of children of God, of child of God. And this will ask me to do a constant work of alignment and realignment by questioning what are my values, what are my core values, to be really on line with that service to God. And also the way I will be living my education or my work, try to figure out what will have to be adjusted in order to be consistent. And it translates also into the way I organize my time for sleep, the choices I make for my food, for example. So it compels us to be very concrete, to incarnate our deep identity in all the dimensions of our life. So it might be very interesting to identify step after step in a given period, what were the moments of consolation? What were the moments of desolation? And at what level would we situate that? For example, in my work, I experienced a moment of consolation in personal decisions. There was such a consolation of this nature, and it was a very good thing at that moment. Or I may have lived moments of desolation in my relationships, for example, something difficult happened. And then I can identify where it happened, at what level it happened. I may also realize that I have health issues, and it puts me into a place that is more difficult, more challenging. But when we do this sorting out exercise, we realize that the good spirit, the spirit of God, is always bringing us back towards this center of gravity where I'm rooted into my identity, while the evil spirit will try to move me away and make me believe that a life is about having more power or more wealth or more acknowledgement from peers, or and the evil spirit will always try to bring me back to a lower level and to bring down my energy, to be sure that I'm acknowledged, that I have a lot of power and wealth, for example. So it will always bring me back to that. While the good spirit will always bring me back to a place of poverty, in understanding that I fully depend on God in my life and I live my life for God. And I might be in a place of indifference in respect with other things, and I will choose only whatever will be helpful to me to bring me back into my alignment with God. And this is another tool, a tool to help you choose between two options. It might be helpful to formulate the question as an alternative. Do I do that, or do I not do that? So shall I do that? Yes or no, basically. So shall I do or not such thing? So try to simplify, to streamline that question in as much as possible and bring it to an alternative, yes, no. And then present or retrieve all the possible arguments that will be in favor of that option. What are the advantages? List all the possible advantages of making one option, but also listing all the disadvantages for that same option. So we have to do that same exercise whether we make one choice or the opposite choice. So it's important to look at the list of all the advantages and disadvantages, whatever decision I make eventually. And once I do that work of positioning, of identification, I'm able to inwardly place myself in my deepest desire call and weigh the arguments, which ones have the most weight, which one are the most significant, and then eventually choose the option which I feel invited by the spirit to select. So being moved by the spirit instead of trying to make my choice mechanically. So letting myself being open to be guided by the spirit. A few tools now for the communal discernment. For communal discernment, the principles are the same. Each group has its own reason for being, its purpose, its deepest calling. And that is the charism of the institution, of the group, when it's a religious group. And we see different charisms in that way. The Jesuits have their own charism, Franciscans have their own charism, Benedictine as well. So it's really that call, that deep call and identity that characterizes the entity that we call charism. And the spirit is at work in the group members, in the group itself and the members of the group. And the communal discernment is about a whole set of tools and processes to create conditions for opening up, recognizing and making decisions under the motion of the spirit. So we put ourselves in a perspective of hearing a deep call, that is, this time it's the call to the group. And in the communal discernment, we'll try to live that alignment between the spiritual identity of the group, the mission, and the way in which the mission will be enacted. So periodically, we'll look at what is giving us the most energy or love for neighbor or zeal. And on the other hand, what depletes our energy? What do we need to move away from? By doing this work of reviewal. Another important element is the spiritual conversation. It's a way to truly listen to the movements of consolation and desolation in oneself, but also in the whole group. So usually we proceed one by one, and people do not respond to one another. So we listen to what is going on, to what the other members of the groups are saying. So in the first round, the persons will share the fruits of a personal prayer after praying about the issues that concern them. Second round, we listen to we talk about what touched us the most in the first round. And the third round, what seems to be emerging from the second round. So we move from me and my personal prayer to the we and what we hear from our conversation. And this is what is taking us from a personal itinerary to a group itinerary. So we bring together a whole set of personal prayers to guide the group and to listen to what is happening at the group level to proceed in consistency. The foundation and fruit is also very important because it promotes the values of the group. So it's all about justice because each person has the same time to speak, inclusion.
Et donc vraiment prise en compte, la réconciliation.
Inclusion, where each person counts, reconciliation, because we're in the process of talking to one person to another, presenting an ideology or a way of thinking. So we're in this person-to-person contact, communion, that we are together and we are turned together towards God. It's not to know who's right or who has the best idea, but it is really to see how we are open to the Spirit and to seek God in all of that and trust. Are we growing in trust? Are we sure that God is working in our life individually and in our life as a group? And can we really feel that we can build something together, something common together? And in the same way, when there are many people that are going through consolation and desolation, we have to see that the couple can also go through consolation and desolation. And so moments of consolation is when the group is truly engaged in active listening and in intentional speaking. You really feel that the people are truly present, they are truly active into what is happening. And we see also that around the word, there is a shared vision, shared truth, shared consensus, and we feel a great deal of unity, a great deal of acceptance. And yet times of desolation will do the opposite. People will disengage. They will be frightened, and they will want to avoid experiences. They're going to try to force our ideas on others. These things happen, and for the group leader, it's the signal that you have to help the group to come back to what they really want to live in order to rediscover a situation of consolation and be able to do things together that will bear fruit. So there we go. During the course of all of this process, and with all of these elements, we have the personal decision-making process, this communal process. What helps me to come to conclusion here is to realize that based on everything that we have seen, the life of Ignatius, the Ignatian spirituality, the different tools, in the end all, we are called to take decisions in the Ignatian manner, and that is to place ourselves within the perspective of the deepest desire of God and to be able to give the best of ourselves. This is the basic orientation that is going to make it possible for us to make the right choices, to take good decisions, because we can live these to the best of our ability. And this is a way of being in different elements. And we have to be concrete, and therefore to bring together the elements that will allow us to choose and to make choices that are concrete and realistic. But in order to do that, we have to be able to commit ourselves in prayer, and it supposes that we would have to do our work, right? That these are not things that just happen. These are things that really require a great deal of commitment, a great deal of research and exploration, and you have to do these things very seriously. And in the end all, we also realize that the decision is something that is taken up less as a problem to be resolved, but rather as an opportunity to allow ourselves to be guided by the Spirit, and to ensure that the Spirit of God in all circumstances directs us towards a place where we can produce the best and most wonderful fruit for others and for the greater glory of God. Thank you very much, Laurence. This is a wonderful presentation that was very much appreciated, especially the tools that you presented, because there are many people who are going to want to use them and have indicated that, so it's highly appreciated. For the question and answer period, we have many questions that came in, so we're going to try and answer as many as possible. Let's begin right away with the first question. The formation or deformation of my consciousness to injustice could have an impact upon the consolation or desolation in my prayer. First of all, I'm very happy to be able to participate in this conversation. I want to thank you for all of your questions that I see are very numerous in the chat. Well, formation, and we're talking about our moral conscience, and maybe to help the person to feel spontaneously what comes to him or her during a situation. But consolation and desolation come from the spirits that are the work of the spirits in us. And all persons who feel consolation doesn't come from the head, but it's rather how the Spirit works in us, in our lives, and how when we look at events and we try to determine what the dominant feeling was, then we will know what is desolation, what is consolation. Okay, thank you. Another question we're asking: how do we present spiritual life to someone who rejects good and evil spirits? Like on TV, we just know that God is one and there is no duality. This is not easy, I think. It might be interesting to invite the person to go back into their own lives to see those things that were life-giving for him or for her, things that lead us more towards confusion, desolation, evil. War, for example, see, it's objectively, it isn't good. And so it is doing away with life, hurting people, putting people down. And so we have to look at what brings life and what takes life away, depletes it. So we have it's important that we have this moral consciousness, that we are directed and oriented towards this. Another question that came up: how can you discern in situations of stress, and how to consider stress as part of our discernment? Situations of stress are very prominent in our lives, and there are many. I think that the tools and the capacity to be able to decide when we're just going to stop to listen. The more stressed you are, the more you have to seek out moments of calm and peace and say, okay, I'm going to take 15 minutes. I'm going to take a half an hour. I'm just going to sit down and listen, and to take up like the little chart there with the tools and ask myself, what is happening? What's in process here? What is happening within me? Why do I feel this? And why do I feel this way? And then ask myself, how can I decide to answer to this? In stressful situations, we always have the capacity to sit down, to reflect, and to determine how we want to engage our own inner freedom in order to bring solution to this. Take a few steps back, rest, relax, to be able to look at the situation with a bit of distance and to see what is our profound desire. How is it in keeping with our desire to give of ourselves? And then in the next question, asked Fanny, what happens when we have to choose between two bad options, when both of them are the cause of desolation and not consolation? Well, answer, maybe we'd have to choose, I guess, the least of both evils, right? But maybe ask yourself, why are these two, both things not good? if you're going to continue to nurture situations that are really not good? Are you going to continue to feed into this? Sometimes we live in circumstances that are difficult, and we don't really have the choice. But then we have to choose kind of like the least of the two evils. What is most coherent for us? Thank you. How do we, with a little bit of standing back from the situation, how to evaluate the situation, and how does the process of discernment help us and unblock our situations? Answer. It helps us to take decisions that are not always great, but sometimes we feel they weren't that wonderful. But the thing is to go back, to look at and see, and ask myself, how did I function in this situation? How do I want to come back on the situation of the process in order to look at the situation again and to decide differently? So a bad decision in itself can be something that can be a wonderful learning process for us. Because we look back to the little chart and ask ourselves, what happened? How did I decide? What is happening in me and why? And then try and draw the wisdom on that. Thank you. We're going to have to stop now, unfortunately, because we have to prepare for the liturgy, and we would like to invite you to attend. Thank you, Sister Laurence, for your presentation, for all of the tools that you shared with us. And I'm sure that many participants will be very, very happy to use in the future. And now I am going to hand the microphone over to Jose for the last part. Excuse me. At the end of the presentation, I think you're going to be receiving the presentation in whole, and you're going to find my email address. And if ever anybody needs, I saw there were so many questions that weren't answered. If anybody would like to get back to me, all you have to do is send me an email. I'd be happy to answer. Okay, and we'll correspond in